Seattle General Hospital in Colorado Springs hums with fluorescent lights at 0200 hours, antiseptic smell mixing with burnt coffee and something underneath, copper and old rain. Sarah Chen moves through the cardiac unit with the kind of invisible efficiency that comes from wanting nothing more than to be forgotten, her scrubs perfectly pressed, her movements economical and precise. The night shift is deliberate. Less traffic. Fewer eyes. Fewer people to notice that a woman who performs 3-layer surgical closures with the steadiness of someone who's done it under mortar fire shouldn't be pushing for carts at 2 in the morning. Her locker holds almost nothing. A change of scrubs. A protein bar she never eats. And the folded flag from Rodriguez, her teammate, killed covering her escape from Kandahar 3 years ago, the one moment of sentiment she allows herself. She presses her palm against it sometimes, just to feel the weight of it, to make sure she still remembers his face. The burn scars on her forearms are visible if someone looks close enough, but no one does. She keeps her sleeves pulled down. The nurse's station is empty at 0230 when Sarah sits at the computer to review charts for the morning handoff. It's routine. Medication histories. Vital sign trends. Discharge notes. Boring work that keeps her invisible. But the billing codes on the ICU admission for room 412 don't match the supply orders logged in the system. She frowns. Pages back through 3 weeks of data. The pattern is there, consistent, systematic, deliberate. Med Supply Solutions LLC. Charges for hospital-grade ventilator tubing. Charges for wound dressing kits. Charges for surgical instruments that never appear in the actual inventory logs. Thousands of dollars a week funneling somewhere. Her hands move across the keyboard, making notes, flagging discrepancies with the kind of methodical precision that comes from 6 years of combat medicine where you document everything because lives depend on accuracy. One wrong number on a casualty report can mean the difference between a body recovered and a body left behind. She's deep in the 3rd week of data when the doors to the unit hiss open. Dr. Marcus Pierce enters the nurse's station like he owns it, which, in a way, he does. Chief of Surgery. 47 years old. Tailored suit under his white coat. The kind of man who wears his watch face outward so everyone can see the price tag. His eyes scan the unit, lock onto Sarah at the computer, and something shifts in his face. He doesn't move closer. Not yet. He just watches her from the threshold, the way a predator assesses prey, checking for weakness, for fear, for any sign of trembling. Sarah feels the weight of his attention the way she felt the weight of Taliban sniper scopes in Sanjan Valley, a pressure against her back, an electrical sensation along her spine that says danger is present and aware. She doesn't look up. She closes the file she's been reading, makes note of the discrepancy one more time, then logs out with a single keystroke. Her movements are smooth. Unhurried. The trembling isn't fear, it's restraint, the kind that comes from learning long ago that showing anything resembling fear gets you killed. Working late, Ms. Chen. His voice lands like a challenge. She hears the test in it. He's trying to see if she'll jump, if she'll apologize for being in the wrong place, if she'll make herself smaller. Night shift. She stands. Meets his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Chart review before morning report. I see. He steps into the station now, moves toward the computer with the confidence of someone used to having doors open for him. Anything unusual? The moment stretches. She could tell him about the billing discrepancies. That's the right thing to do. That's what a good employee does, report fraud through proper channels. But there's something in his face, something in the way he moved to the computer the moment she closed the file, that tells her he already knows. That he's checking to see if she knows. Nothing significant, she says. Her voice is steady. Almost a whisper. Routine admissions. His hand hovers over the keyboard. His jaw works, once, twice. He's calculating. Deciding how much to play this game. Good. We maintain very high standards here at Seattle General. Accuracy. Integrity. It's important that everyone understands our expectations. The way he says it, the weight behind every word, makes clear this isn't about standards anymore. It's a warning. She feels it like a pressure change before a storm. Sarah nods once. Of course, Doctor. She moves past him, keeping her distance by exactly the width of the desk. Her badge clears the security door with a soft beep. But that wasn't the worst part. That was just the first move in a game she didn't want to play. She's halfway down the corridor when the emergency call comes through the intercom. Code assist, supply closet B. Code assist, supply closet B. Supply closet B is in the basement. Nobody codes in supply closets unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. Sarah changes direction without thinking about it, her feet already moving toward the stairwell, an old habit, the instinct to run toward fire instead of away from it. Bad habit in civilian hospitals. Dangerous habit when you're supposed to be invisible. But the body remembers what the mind is trying to forget. The supply closet door is propped open when she arrives, fluorescent light spilling into the basement corridor. Inside, a man is slumped against the shelving unit, mid-60s, weathered face, right leg twisted at an angle that says compound fracture. But that's not the immediate problem. The immediate problem is the laceration across his left side, bleeding freely, soaking through the front of a hoodie with USMC stenciled across the chest. His eyes are alert. Don't call anybody. No hospitals. I can't afford it. One of the charge nurses, Marcus, a good kid from Pueblo, is on his phone calling for an attending. Sarah doesn't hesitate. Give me pressure bandages. Now. Sarah, he's not even a patient. We need pressure bandages. Marcus goes. He's young enough to still listen to authority even when it doesn't come with a title. Sarah is already moving, her hands already assessing the wound, checking depth, checking for arterial involvement, checking the color of the blood. Dark. Oozing. Venous or minor arterial. Survivable if she's fast. Hold still, she says. The man grabs her wrist. His grip is strong despite everything. You. I know you. Kandahar. FOB Shank. You were the surgeon. You closed up Petty Officer Graves' leg when it was hanging by a thread. I was there. I saw it. Sarah's hands go still. Her eyes flick up to his face, really look at him for the first time. Recognition comes like a jolt. Not from his face. From the way he moves, the way his eyes track and assess, the muscle memory of a career in ops. His name comes to her before she consciously retrieves it from memory. Corporal Danny Chen. No relation. But he was there. He watched her perform a procedure that shouldn't have worked, that happened in a tent with a generator failing in the background while someone outside was screaming. Pressure, she says instead of answering. Marcus returns with gauze and compression bandages. Sarah works with the economy of motion that comes from having trained hands in the worst possible conditions. The bleeding slows. She's already assessing, there's a laceration that needs closing, at least for centimeters, looks like it needs stitches, looks like maybe some underlying tissue damage that needs evaluation. Proper protocol is the ER. Proper protocol is waiting for an attending. Proper protocol is letting the system work. Proper protocol would also mean reporting the fraud she just saw, and how did that work out for the people who did the right thing in Kandahar? She pulls open the supply cabinet behind Corporal Chen. Finds gauze, finds betadine, finds a surgical tray that shouldn't be in a supply closet but is. Her hands move on their own now, muscle memory taking over. She cleans the wound with antiseptic, the smell of iodine mixing with the copper of blood. 3-layer closure. Dermis. Subcutaneous. Epidermis. The needle passes through skin with the resistance of a specific density she's learned to recognize without thinking. In and out. In and out. 8 stitches. Tight knots. The sutures are perfect, the kind of perfect that takes years to learn. What the Marcus stands in the doorway. Sarah, you can't just, we need a doctor to. Bleeding stopped, she says. Wound closed. Needs follow-up, but he'll live. She doesn't look at Marcus. She's tying off the final knot, and her voice when she speaks is so quiet it's almost not there. I'm going on break. She sets down the needle driver. Steps back. Lets her hands drop to her sides where Marcus can't see them anymore, where the shaking finally starts, but quiet, internal, the kind that only happens when you're alone in your own skull. Corporal Chen is staring at her. His lips move. Kandahar, he whispers. You were at the FOB. Sarah presses one finger to her lips. Not a request. A command. The same gesture she's been using for 3 years to make people disappear back into their own lives and their own silence. His eyes understand. He's military. He knows what a closed mouth means. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that in doing the right thing, in closing a wound that needed closing, she just became more visible to someone who was already starting to see her. And Dr. Pierce, upstairs in the nurse's station, now knows for certain that she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Room for 12, 1,400 hours. Sarah adjusted the fall line with the precise touch of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, not as a nurse, but as a surgeon in field tents where the difference between a steady hand and a trembling one meant whether a Marine went home or came home in a flag. The patient, a young corporal with a chest scar still pink from open heart repair, watched her with the kind of gratitude that made her invisible work feel seen. His wife sat in the corner chair. His adult daughter stood by the bed, hand on his shoulder. Everything was going right. Sarah had learned that meant nothing. The door opened. Dr. Pierce stepped in carrying the patient's chart like a weapon. He was tall, silver at the temples, the kind of doctor hospitals advertised in brochures, competent, authoritative, the type who didn't need to raise his voice because he'd never been questioned. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on Sarah's hands, still working the four-port with sterile technique. Nurse Chen, he said, and the way he said it made the corporal's wife sit up straighter. Is this your first day? Because that's the only explanation for this incompetent setup. The room pressure changed. Became thick. Sarah's hands kept moving. The line held. The port sealed. Perfect. This is not protocol, Pierce continued, stepping closer to the bed, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, and he was speaking so everyone would hear. We don't hang lines this way in a level 1 trauma center. We follow procedure. We follow hierarchy. He gestured for Sarah to step into the hallway. Not a request. A summons. Sarah followed. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song overhead. Listen, night shift, Pierce said, his voice dropping to something that somehow sounded worse than the public volume, intimate, contemptuous, the tone someone uses when they know they have absolute power. I don't know what veterinary school taught you to place lines, but in a real hospital, we follow protocols. In a real hospital, nurses understand their scope. Their limitations. He paused, let that sink into her skin like cold water. The corporal in there deserves actual medical care. Not whatever certification you picked up on the night shift. Back in room for 12, the corporal was trying to defend her. Doc, she's doing fine. Line looks perfect to me. Sir, please let the professionals handle this, Pierce said without looking at him, eyes still on Sarah. Sarah took one measured breath. She'd taken measured breaths in Kandahar while a Marine bled out through a femoral artery and the morphine was running low. She'd taken measured breaths while holding a man's intestines in her hands, keeping them warm, keeping them inside, keeping him alive through a 40-minute firefight. One measured breath now was muscle memory. One measured breath meant control. A single tear escaped. Just one. She wiped it with the back of her gloved hand without breaking eye contact. I've held intestines inside men better than you'll ever be, Doctor. Pierce's face reddened. The color spread from his jawline up to his temples like someone turning a valve. He walked away without another word. But Sarah knew she'd just made her first irreversible decision. The line had crossed. You don't say things like that to people with his kind of power and expect to keep your invisibility. The next morning at 0700, Sarah sat down with her coffee in the break room. Black, no sugar, the way people learned to drink it when hot water came from a helmet and milk came in powder form. The steam rose up, and for exactly 3 seconds, everything was normal. Then 6 staff nurses saw her. 6 nurses exchanged glances, quick, coordinated, the synchronization of a group decision that had already been made somewhere else. Somewhere without her. One by one, they stood up. Not angry. Worse than angry. Clinical. Professional. They were excising her like a contaminated tissue sample. One nurse left her breakfast half-eaten on the table. Another left her coffee still steaming. They filed out in silence. Not a word. Not a look. Just gone. Sarah sat alone at that table for exactly 60 seconds. She counted them. She'd learned in Kandahar that control meant measuring time in small increments. 1 breath. 5 heartbeats. 60 seconds of not moving. Of showing nothing. The empty room around her was a message from the hospital, written in empty chairs. Then she stood and returned to work. Thursday, 1430 hours. Sarah was at the unit station reviewing discharge notes when she saw it. The paper on the bulletin board, printed on official Seattle General letterhead, posted where every nurse, doctor, and resident would see it. Her name at the top. A formal write-up. The reason was insubordination. She read it once. Then again. Pierce was citing her for unsafe practice and failure to follow chain of command based on an incident from Wednesday when she'd questioned his order for a beta blocker, a contraindicated medication for a patient whose cardiac rhythm couldn't tolerate the additional slowing effect. She'd been right. The medication would have dropped his heart rate from 84 to dangerously low. She'd been right, and now it was on paper as her failure. A resident read it aloud to another one. Failure to follow chain of command, questioning attending physician judgment, pattern of concerning behavior. Sarah's hand moved to her pocket. The folded flag was still there, the small square of fabric from Rodriguez's uniform, the Marine who died covering her extraction from Kandahar. She'd kept it 3 years. She'd kept it through every humiliation, every night shift, every decision to be small and forgettable. She kept her hand there for 1 second, then let it drop. The write-up was just the beginning. It was the first formal step. Pierce was building something. A dossier. A case. Not because she'd made a medical error, she hadn't. Because she'd made him look small in front of a patient. Because she'd reminded him that there were kinds of competence his title didn't guarantee. Because she existed, and her existence was inconvenient to his plans. That night, everything changed. 0200 hours, Saturday morning. The sirens cut through Seattle General's careful silence like something alive and furious. Code red. Trauma activation. All hands. Sarah's feet moved before her mind caught up. That was the job, the rhythm that every good nurse carried in their body like a second heartbeat. Paramedics wheeled in a stretcher carrying a man in his 60s, blood-stained and unconscious, the paramedic straddling his chest performing compressions. Vehicular collision, multiple impacts, I-25 and Camelback, patient ejected, found unresponsive, severe pneumothorax, heart rate dropping, blood pressure 70/40 and falling. Admiral James Whitaker. The name came through the radio like a curse. The trauma team moved with the synchronized precision of people who'd done this 100 times. The trauma surgeon cut away his shirt. His chest was caving in on the right side, the classic sign that the lung had collapsed, that pressure was building inside him like a grenade with the pin pulled. His trachea was deviated. Breath sounds were completely absent on the right. Sarah saw it immediately, saw it the way she'd seen it in a tent in Kandahar when a Humvee's armor plating couldn't stop what needed stopping. Tension pneumothorax. The kind that kills you in minutes if you don't decompress it. The ER attending pulled up the patient's records on the screen. His fingers froze on the keyboard. "Classified markers," he said quietly. "Military medical file. Federal security clearance notation. Flags from the Pentagon indicating that certain protocols applied. Certain limitations. Certain bureaucratic weights that could crush a hospital's entire audit standing if they weren't followed perfectly." The attending page, Dr. Pierce. Within 15 minutes, 7 doctors stood outside Trauma Bay 3. Dr. Pierce. 2 surgeons. 3 residents. The ER attending who discovered the flags. They stood in a cluster outside the bay window, reading the chart, reading each other's faces, doing the calculus that had nothing to do with medicine. "This patient represents significant legal liability," Pierce said, and his voice was steady, rational, the voice of someone explaining mathematics. "Federal auditors review every aspect of care for flag patients. If we proceed without proper authorization, without Pentagon clearance, we expose this hospital to investigation." The surgical resident stepped back. "I'm not risking my license for this." The trauma surgeon nodded. "We need proper channels. Proper authorization." One by one, they concurred. Not from cruelty. From fear. From the weight of institutional power pressing down on individual conscience. One by one, 7 doctors decided that protocol mattered more than the patient gasping in the bay behind them. 7 doctors refused to operate. The cardiac monitor alarmed. Oxygen saturation dropping. 78%. Dropping. Sarah stood at the trauma bay window watching them debate. She could see the Admiral's chest trying to collapse inward. She could see the fight leaving his body as the pressure inside him built with nowhere to go. She could see the moment that mattered, the single moment when everything tipped from saving to losing. Her hand reached for the 14-gauge needle on the crash cart. And then the real nightmare began. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 0200, and Admiral James Whittaker came through on a stretcher like a man whose body was trying to leave his consciousness behind. The car accident on I-25 had folded his sedan into a geometry that no human frame was meant to survive. GSW, no, not gunshot. Blunt force trauma. Hemopneumothorax with rib fractures across the right anterior chest. His breathing came in wet, desperate gasps. The paramedic's hands moved with practiced urgency as she rattled off vitals that made every nurse in the bay tense, blood pressure 70/40 and falling, O2 saturation dropping from 88 to 82 to 76, heart rate 146 and climbing, respiratory rate 32 and accelerating. The kind of numbers that meant minutes, not hours. Dr. Pierce stood in the trauma bay doorway with his entire on-call team, 7 doctors in total, a full surgical roster that should have moved like a coordinated machine. Instead, they moved like men made of doubt. The emergency room clerk had flagged Whittaker's chart before it hit the printer. 2 words at the top, classified military. Below that, a warning banner in red, Official Department of Defense record. Federal documentation restrictions apply. Sarah was running the setup when she heard the first refusal. Not a question. Not a consultation. A flat statement delivered by a resident who was already backing away from the bedside. "I'm not opening him up," the resident said. His name was Hartley. He'd done 14 thoracotomies this year. That's a federal liability. "I'm not risking my license." Dr. Pierce arrived moments later, moving through the trauma bay with the deliberate slowness of a man constructing a narrative. His eyes passed over the Admiral, dying, literally dying, his lung collapsing in real time, and fixed instead on the chart's red banner. Sarah watched his face. Watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The fraud in his billing codes. The fake medical supply company. The federal audits that would unravel if anyone dug into his patient's charts carefully enough. This man was a Navy patient. This meant paperwork. Official investigation. Oversight committees. "Step back," Pierce ordered. Not to Sarah. To the room. To the very concept of saving this man's life. We're invoking Protocol 7B, potential federal entanglement. This patient needs to be transferred to a military facility. He won't survive the transfer, Sarah said. Her voice was flat. Not a question. A fact delivered like a lab result. He's losing his lung right now. Then he loses it in federal custody, Pierce replied. His eyes didn't meet hers. Not in my hospital. Not with my signature on the authorization. The second refusal came from Dr. Costianos, the attending anesthesiologist. I can't sedate a classified patient without federal documentation. The forms alone, they're at Fitzsimmons, over in Colorado Springs, but the base won't release them without. Get the forms, Sarah said. That's not your call, Nurse Chen. Pierce's voice had changed. Sharpened. There was an edge in it now that hadn't been there before, the sound of a man who decided she was becoming a problem. In fact, your role here is documentation. You'll prepare an incident report. Now. The third, fourth, and fifth refusals came in quick succession. Dr. Reeves, the trauma surgeon, military hospital, military problem. Dr. Gupta, the cardiothoracic fellow, that's above my clearance level. Dr. Morrison, the senior resident, I'm not touching this. Not touching it. 7 doctors. The entire on-call surgical roster. Not one of them reached for gloves. The Admiral's O2 sat dropped to 71. His breath came in shallow, desperate pulls. The ventilator they'd bagged him with was keeping him alive on fumes, literally. His right lung wasn't expanding. The air was going somewhere else. Into the pleural space. Compressing his heart. Stealing his oxygen with the efficiency of a predator that didn't need to hurry. Sarah's hand moved toward the crash cart before her brain finished the thought. A 14-gauge angiocath needle. 18 inches long. Not subtle. Not gentle. The kind of tool you used when you had seconds, not minutes. She counted the ribs under the fluorescent wash of the overhead lights. 1, 2, 3. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The exact spot between life and the kind of death that happened too fast for anyone to stop it. Pierce stepped forward. His presence moved through the trauma bay like pressure change before a storm. Nurse Chen, you are not authorized to perform invasive procedures. Step away from that patient immediately. That is a direct order from your attending physician. Sarah didn't step away. Her hands were already moving, prepping the skin with an iodine swab, her fingers finding the exact spot between ribs where a needle could release a trapped pneumothorax before it turned into a cardiac arrest. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something sharper, the metallic bite of dried blood, old and copper-colored, from the Admiral's original wound. He has for minutes before his heart stops, Sarah said. You can fire me after. She didn't wait for his response. The needle went in at a 45-degree angle, perpendicular to the chest wall. Smooth pressure. Muscle memory took over, the kind of memory that came from holding viscera inside a man's abdomen while mortar rounds fell 30 meters away. The kind of memory that didn't ask permission. The hiss of air escaping. That sound. That singular, unmistakable sound of a tension pneumothorax releasing. The Admiral's body convulsed once, a reflex older than civilization, the moment when a dying organism realized it could breathe again. The monitor's numbers began climbing, O2 sat 77, 81, 85, 89. The heart rate dropped from 146 to 128 to 110. The blood pressure rose from 70/40 to 88/52. Not stable. Not close to stable. But alive. I need a chest tube tray, Sarah said. Not requested. Stated. Her voice had dropped an octave. An thoracotomy set up. Now. A surgical tech, frozen, looked toward the hallway where the 7 doctors still stood motionless, watching but not acting. The tech grabbed the chest tube tray. Muscle memory of her own kind. Pierce moved toward Sarah with the terrible deliberateness of a man performing for an audience that existed only in his mind. He pulled out his phone. Started photographing. Started documenting. His voice took on the bureaucratic precision that made decisions feel final. "I'm invoking Protocol 7B, he announced to the room, not to Sarah. Unauthorized procedures by non-physicians. Immediate suspension of duties. Mandatory incident reporting to the State Board and Federal Oversight Committees. This nurse is operating outside her scope of practice and in direct violation of physician authority." He began printing. Sarah could hear the printer in the hallway through the open trauma bay doors, that mechanical whir and click that meant pages. 17 of them. She knew because she heard him counting. 17 pages of policy violations. 17 pages of regulatory breaches. 17 pages of insubordination instances that he'd been constructing in his mind since the moment she'd correctly questioned his contraindicated medication order 3 days ago. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Not threatening. Just present. Waiting for the word. Sarah placed the chest tube through the second intercostal space, established drainage, confirmed the tube was flowing clear and then bloody, good blood, the kind that meant the pneumothorax was resolving and the hemothorax was beginning to drain. The Admiral's breathing stabilized. Deeper. Easier. The monitor showed a rhythm that was almost normal, almost stable. Almost alive. In the adjacent trauma bay, separated only by a thin curtain, a former Marine patient, recovering from a GSW repair that Sarah had assisted with 2 days prior, watched through the gap. His name was Reeves. He was supposed to be sleeping, but he was watching instead. He watched her hands perform the 3-layer closure technique that she'd taught herself in Kandahar. He watched the specific way she tied off the bleeders, that precise loop and tuck that came from experience with tissue that mattered, with lives that couldn't be lost to infection or slipping ligatures. His eyes widened. Recognition moved across his face like a shock wave. "Kandahar," he whispered. Barely audible. "You were at the FOB." Sarah pressed a finger to her lips. One small gesture. Everything unsaid in that moment communicated itself anyway. The Marine nodded. Understood. His eyes closed. Pierce's voice came next, cold, administrative, final. At 0600, her badge will be deactivated. Security will escort her out. She's done here. All of you, listen to me. Any nurse who assisted her in this unauthorized procedure will face immediate termination and State Board review. This patient will be transferred to the federal facility in Aurora when his condition is stable enough for transport. Sarah stayed until the Admiral's breathing settled. Until the monitors showed numbers that meant survival, at least for the next few hours. Then she stepped back from the bed. The security guards were already waiting. She could see them in her peripheral vision, 2 men who weren't trying to look threatening but were simply present, a physical manifestation of consequence. As she walked out of Trauma Bay 3, still wearing bloody scrubs, still smelling of iodine and blood and something sharper, the distinctive copper scent of a life saved, she passed the 7 doctors in the hallway. None of them met her eyes. Hartley looked at the floor. Castellanos found something fascinating about his phone. Reeves, Morrison, Gupta, the others whose names she'd already begun forgetting because they'd made themselves forgettable in this moment. Pierce followed her out, building his narrative as he walked. This was documented, Nurse Chen. Every violation. Every unauthorized action. The State Board will see every page. The hospital's legal team will see every page. You're done at Seattle General. By 0700, you won't have clearance to set foot in this building. Sarah walked toward the locker room without responding. The rain had started outside, heavy, hard rain that hammered the windows like applause for a performance that nobody wanted to see. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From restraint. From the terrible, specific knowledge that this moment was exactly what Pierce had been building toward since the moment he'd decided she knew too much. Sarah moved through the emergency preparation with the fluidity of someone whose hands had memorized every instrument before her mind caught up. Thoracotomy setup. Left anterolateral approach. The Admiral's BP was climbing slightly, not enough, but a direction. She didn't look at Pierce as he moved through the trauma bay like a man possessed, phone pressed to his ear, papers already printing from the wall-mounted terminal. 17 pages. She could hear the machine grinding them out. He was building something. A dossier. A case. The kind of documentation that didn't just terminate employment, it erased credibility. "Call the OR," she said to the surgical tech, her voice level as water. "Tell them we're incoming in 4 minutes." Pierce hung up his phone. His face had gone the color of old concrete. He was looking at the Admiral, not at the man, but at the security clearance notation still visible on the intake form. Classified markers. Pentagon stamps. The kind of paperwork that made hospitals nervous. The kind that made ambitious surgeons run. She watched him calculate the risk, watched his fingers move toward his own phone again. Another call. To whom? The hospital administrator. His lawyer. Someone who'd tell him to let this problem walk through the door unsolved. The Admiral's respirations were shallow. 18 breaths per minute, declining. His O2 sat at 89 and dropping with each breath that his collapsed lung wouldn't let him take. Sarah prepped the chest tube, 7 French pigtail catheter, ready for placement. She'd done this in a tent in Kandahar with a penlight and hand steadier than they were now. The difference was that in Kandahar, no one was building a legal case against her while she worked. "We need an attending," Pierce said loudly. "To the room, to the record, to the security cameras mounted in the corner. Before we proceed, we need surgical authorization." "The patient is in hemorrhagic shock," Sarah replied, not looking up from her prep. "Authorization happens after we stabilize him." "I'm calling this Code 7B Protocol. Non-physician emergency intervention procedures require dual attending sign-off before advancement." Pierce's voice had taken on the formal cadence of someone reading from a manual, and Sarah understood then, he wasn't speaking to her anymore. He was performing for the recording device. Building a record of his compliance, his caution, his reasonableness in the face of her insubordination. The next words out of his mouth changed everything. "I'm invoking my right to request a peer review before emergency authorization," Pierce announced. "This patient requires an attending surgeon present." Dr. Matsuda, the trauma attending, stood in the doorway wearing her coat, car keys already in her hand. She looked at the Admiral's chart. She looked at the classified markers. Sarah watched her calculate the same risk Pierce had calculated. The same cost-benefit analysis that 6 other doctors had already performed. Matsuda backed away. Not running, just stepping back, the way a chess player retreats from a board where all the moves lead to checkmate. 7 doctors. The number hung in the air like shrapnel. Sarah's jaw tightened. One muscle, just one, contracting once. That was her tell. That was the only place her composure ever cracked. She straightened. Looked directly at Pierce, and in that moment, something happened to her voice. It descended. Not a shout, but a drop in register that made every nurse in the trauma bay still. "Get out of my way, doctor." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The kind of command that comes from someone accustomed to authority in rooms where compliance isn't negotiable. Pierce flinched. Actually flinched, as if he'd been struck. Sarah had already turned back to the Admiral, her hands moving through the setup with the terrifying fluid precision of muscle memory working in parallel with training. 14 years of surgery. 7 of it in sand and blood and the kind of pressure that teaches you what your hands are actually capable of. She didn't need permission. At 0600, when security arrived with her badge already deactivated, the plastic hanging from a lanyard, dead as a grounded pilot, Sarah was already changing out of her scrubs. They waited outside the locker room, 2 men in Navy uniforms who wouldn't meet her eyes. Professional courtesy, or complicity? She decided not to wonder which. The locker door was painted a pale institutional blue, dented in 3 places from careless handling. Rodriguez's flag was exactly where she'd left it. Folded by someone's hands in Kandahar. folded by hands that had belonged to a man who died so she could live. The fabric was cotton, soft from years of handling, bearing the creases of a meticulous fold. Ceremonial. The kind of fold that speaks of respect and loss and the specific weight of the dead. She held it for exactly 30 seconds. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. The trembling wasn't fear, it was restraint. The terrible specific knowledge that if she let any of this become emotion, she wouldn't survive the next hour as anything other than a broken woman, and Rodriguez hadn't died for her to break. Sarah placed the flag in her jacket pocket. The one that still had blood on the cuff. She'd rolled the sleeves before they deactivated her, but there were spray marks near the hem. Admiral's blood. Thoracotomy blood. The evidence of work she wasn't supposed to do by a person who officially didn't exist. She changed slowly. Removed the bloody scrubs that hung from her frame like a uniform she was surrendering. The fabric was still damp. She folded them anyway, a 3-layer fold, neat and precise, the way someone does things when they're saying goodbye to them. When she placed her name tag on top of the neatly creased fabric, she was already gone. The Sarah Chen who worked night shifts at Seattle General, the Sarah Chen who was just a nurse, had already ceased to exist. The hospital laundry room was empty at 0900. The industrial washers hummed their white noise meditation. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like trapped insects. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding the folded scrubs, unable to take the final step that would move her from the threshold into permanence. Once she placed them in the sorting bin, it was over. The papers had already been filed. The badge had already been killed. Pierce was probably already on the phone to whoever came next, whoever would sanitize his role in this, whoever would promise him that what he'd done was necessary, was justified, was the right call in a complicated situation. An older woman emerged from the linen storage room. Margaret. Sarah didn't know her last name, though she'd worked here for 9 years. Margaret had always been kind in the way that people are kind when they assume you have nothing, small gestures, a smile that didn't demand anything back, a chair offered in the break room without condescension. "Why'd they let you go, honey?" Margaret asked. Her hands were already reaching for the scrubs, the habit of her job moving her forward even as her eyes registered that this was different. This was someone's ending. "I did my job," Sarah said. And she had. That was the strange, perfect, terrible clarity of it. She had done exactly what her training demanded, what her oath required, what her hands had been built for. The Admiral would survive because she hadn't walked away. The Admiral would wake up because she had done something that Pierce couldn't prosecute, couldn't document away, couldn't make disappear. She placed the folded scrubs in Margaret's hands. The flag stayed in her jacket pocket, heavy as a grenade. She walked toward the service entrance, not the main lobby where hospital staff might see her, where might trigger some final humiliation, but through the back corridors where the loading docks connected to the world outside. Where people who worked night shifts disappeared into daylight and were never questioned. The door had a pneumatic closer that side as it swung shut behind her. The air outside was 47 degrees and smelled like diesel exhaust from the delivery trucks. Colorado Springs in the early morning had a particular quality of light, gray and bright at once, the kind that made everything look temporary. Meanwhile, in the ICU, Admiral Whitaker's eyes opened. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm beside his bed. A nurse checked his pupils, his O2, the inflation of his chest as the machine did the work his lungs weren't ready for yet. The thoracotomy had held. The 3-layer closure hadn't bled. He was alive because someone had refused to walk away. The Marine from the adjacent trauma bay, his GSW repair stable now, his forepole dragged slowly across the space between their beds, wheeled closer to the Admiral's side rail. His own surgery had been textbook, routine, the kind of repair that doesn't require legend. He knew what he'd witnessed though. The precision. The confidence. The hands that didn't belong to anyone in a standard rotation. "Sir," the Marine said, his voice still rough from intubation. "That nurse who saved you. I know her from Kandahar. Her surgical technique. I've seen it before." The Admiral, groggy but lucid in that way that pain keeps you focused, turned his head slightly. Every micro-movement hurt. Every breath was a negotiation with the thoracotomy. But his eyes had clarity. What was her call sign? He asked. The Marine thought. Reached back through 3 years of memory to a FOB medical tent where someone had spray-painted a name on the canvas. Not for glory. For warning. For the kind of reputation that kept people alive in the dark. Valkyrie, sir. They called her Valkyrie. The Admiral closed his eyes. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. A name that had been buried under classified protocols and redacted files, and the official erasure that came with Operation Seahawk suddenly stood visible. One word. One call sign. And with it, the knowledge that the impossible had just become possible, that legends didn't stay buried forever, that the Pentagon's secrets had expiration dates. Admiral Whitaker's eyes opened at exactly 03:47 in the morning. The machines around him beat their steady rhythm: ventilator, cardiac monitor, pressure bag hung on a stand like a blood transfusion waiting to happen. His throat was raw. His chest was bandaged. But he was breathing. He was alive. The Marine in the bed beside him, separated only by a curtain and the weight of shared trauma, sat upright, watching him wake. Whitaker's voice came out like gravel. Valkyrie. Just that one word. Just that call sign that had been buried for 4 years, that belonged to a combat surgeon who'd vanished from the official record the moment Operation Seahawk was declassified and then immediately reclassified again. The Marine's body went rigid. He knew that name. He knew exactly who it meant. And he knew she was the woman who'd saved Whitaker's life in the trauma bay. The Marine reached for his phone with trembling hands. Not trembling from fear. Trembling from recognition. He pulled up his security clearance database, still active from his reserve status, and searched her name. Captain Sarah Chen. The page loaded slowly, pixels resolving into a photograph of a woman in dress blues, her face younger than the hands he'd seen working in that trauma bay, and beneath it, Navy Cross recipient, Captain Sarah Chen, for extraordinary heroism under fire during combat operations, Kandahar, 2019. His voice wasn't steady when he read it aloud. The words came out like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. Navy Cross recipient. Captain Sarah Chen. For extraordinary heroism under fire during combat operations. The second he finished speaking, the door to the hospital room exploded inward. Dr. Pierce stood in the frame like he owned the building. Behind him, 2 people in dark suits moved through the doorway with the kind of calm authority that made the air pressure change. Pentagon. Federal. The kind of presence that turned ordinary rooms into interrogation chambers. Pierce's face was already twisted, already prepared. He held up the termination papers like a flag of surrender that nobody had accepted yet. She's a fraud, General, Pierce said, his voice sharp as a scalpel. I have documentation, 17 pages of policy violations, unauthorized procedures, insubordination. The attorney stepped forward. One of them opened a leather portfolio. Inside was a classified service jacket. The kind with security seals. The kind that shouldn't exist outside of Pentagon vaults. Pierce's words died mid-sentence. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The taller attorney, Colonel Marcus Hayes, according to the name tape on his jacket, saluted. Not the sharp salute of a ceremony. The deliberate, slow salute of a warrior acknowledging another warrior. His arm bent at exactly 90 degrees, his hand flat against his temple. The silence in the room became so absolute that you could hear the rain starting outside, tapping against the windows like Morse code. Pierce stared. The Marine stared. Admiral Whitaker, still half sedated, began to understand that whatever he'd thought he knew about the woman who'd saved his life was about to be revised upward by a factor of magnitude he couldn't calculate. Hayes turned to Sarah Chen, except Sarah Chen wasn't in the room. But somewhere in Seattle General Hospital at that exact moment, a phone began to ring. Someone had given her the number. Someone on the inside had made a choice. She answered on the second ring, standing in a supply closet where she'd hidden an hour earlier, where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps, where the smell of antiseptic and industrial cleaner was thick enough to taste. The voice on the other end said, "Captain Chen. This is Colonel Marcus Hayes, Office of Naval Intelligence. Your security clearance has been reinstated as of 03 for 2 hours. You are no longer missing. You are no longer absent. You are recalled to active duty pending recognition proceedings. Where are you?" Sarah gave an address. 7 minutes later, she was walking through the corridors of Seattle General Hospital in her Navy dress blues, the uniform that had been packed in a cedar closet for 36 months, the one she'd thought she'd never wear again. Her ribbons caught the hallway lights, a row of color that told a story that most people would never be cleared to read. Rows that said Kandahar. Rows that said classified. Rows that said she'd been more than a nurse all along. She walked into Whitaker's room and the Marine veteran stood up. His full line stretched. His incision sight pulled. He didn't care. He saluted. It was the salute of someone who'd served, who understood protocol, who recognized rank. Sarah returned it with the precision of someone who'd worn it for over a decade. Pierce was still standing there, his termination papers now utterly meaningless, the words printed on them becoming less real by the second as the two Pentagon attorneys flanked Sarah like an honor guard. The video of Room for 12 was already uploading. The Marine's daughter had filmed it. His phone had been in his pocket. The sound of Pierce's voice saying basic competence and insubordination was already spreading across social media at a velocity that no institutional response could contain. By 1100 hours, the video had reached 500,000 views. By 1400, it had crossed 2 million. The hashtags multiplied like bacteria in a growth medium, #NavyCrossHero, #7 doctors walked away, #1 nurse stayed. The comments rolled in from every direction, veterans, nurses, surgeons who'd trained under Pierce and suddenly understood why something had always felt wrong. By 1900 hours, the hospital board had called an emergency meeting. They pulled financial records. They called in a forensic accountant. And they found something that made even the board chairman's hands shake, MedSupply Solutions LLC. 18 months of billing irregularities. $2,300,000 funneled through shell accounts and dummy invoices. A system built by Dr. Pierce and operated by his brother-in-law, a medical supply salesman who'd suddenly become very wealthy. At 20:47 hours, Dr. Pierce's phone rang. The caller ID read, Dr. Marcus Webb, Johns Hopkins University, retired. Pierce had trained under Webb. Webb had been his mentor, the man who'd taught him the first principle of medicine, do no harm. Webb had served in Desert Storm as a Navy surgeon. Webb had seen combat. Webb had honor. The voice that came through the phone was shaking with a rage so pure it sounded almost like crying. "Richard, I just watched that video. I taught you medicine. I taught you how to use your hands to save lives. I taught you honor. I don't know what you've become, but you are not my student anymore. You are not my colleague. And you are not welcome to use my name ever again. I'm calling the board. I'm calling the state. I'm done with you." The line went dead. Pierce tried to call back. The number was already blocked. The email from Webb arrived at 2100 hours, copied to the hospital's CEO, the State Medical Licensing Board, and every faculty member at Johns Hopkins. 3 paragraphs that dismantled everything Pierce had built. The suspension was official by midnight. His hospital email deactivated. His keycard did. His office access revoked. Security found him sitting in his car in the parking garage at 0130 hours, staring at news articles about himself, each one worse than the last, each one having more comments than the previous one. 6 months later, Sarah Chen walked past Seattle General Hospital's ambulance bay in her Navy dress uniform. Admiral Whitaker was being discharged, not as a patient, but as a dignitary, his recovery complete, his record cleared, his heroism reintegrated into the official historical record. and there, loading boxes into a blue medical supply van, wearing a company uniform that said only Richard above the pocket, was Dr. Richard Pierce. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. He looked away first. His hands fumbled with the van door. And then he drove away into the Colorado Springs afternoon, disappearing into traffic the way people disappear when they've become nobody. Inside the hospital, Sarah's photograph hung in the Hall of Honor. Captain Sarah Chen, USN. Below it, Admiral Whitaker's personal commendation, one nurse stayed when 7 walked away. The Marine patient stood in front of it with his daughter, the one who'd posted the video that changed everything. He saluted. She returned it. And then she walked to her new office on the 4th floor, the one that read Director of Trauma Services on the nameplate, the one where Rodriguez's folded flag now hung in a frame instead of hiding in a pocket. That evening, Sarah stood at a window overlooking the city. Rain hammered the glass. Her hands, scarred and steady, rested on the frame of the flag. The quietest person in the room had been holding it all together the entire time. Nobody had known. And that was okay. That had always been okay. Heroes didn't need recognition to do what needed doing. But recognition felt like peace. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated and proven yourself beyond measure, subscribe to our channel for more stories of hidden strength and quiet heroism. Like and comment if you've ever witnessed someone's true character emerge when the pressure turned unbearable. Because these stories matter. They remind us that the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones nobody's paying attention to.